Hello, everyone. We're going to get started. Welcome. This policy committee meeting of the Radnor Township School Board is now called to order. Today is Tuesday, February 10th, 2026, a little bit after 6 p.m. My name is Janie Lau. I am chair of the policy committee. Unfortunately, my co-chair, Mr. Tom Lee, is out of the country at the moment, so he has an excused absence. But we are joined by my fellow committee member, Ms. Susan Stern, as well as by Ms. Lon Rosenblum, who's joining us remotely. And thank you, Lon, for joining us. I know you're feeling under the weather. We are joined as well tonight by Dr. Scott Hand, our administrative liaison, our solicitor, Mr. Mike Christofko. Unfortunately, our superintendent, Dr. Ken Batchelor, also has an excused absence. He is at a national conference of superintendents this week. Also with us, we have Mr. Dan Bechtold, also from the school district. We have our student liaison, Lucy Loiseau. And then we have our faculty liaison, Ms. Janae Peterson. So, welcome. I just wanted to mention we have 3 of 4 committee members present, so let the record show that we do have a quorum. At this point, I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Hand for his administrative remarks.
Thank you very much, and welcome to our first policy committee meeting of the 2026 school year. We did not have a policy committee meeting in January, so this is our welcome back. And typically what we do at the start of policy committee meetings when we have boards switch over and board committees switch over, we like to start with a presentation that we had done before a few different times, and we have the opportunity to be able to do that tonight to share a little bit of background about the policy committee and what the policy committee actually is. So this is an annual review of something that we do. So as a policy committee, some of the work that we do, our real function in here is to review the policies that are developed by the Board of School Directors in order to guide the district and district administration in how we carry out those policies and developing rules, procedures, and regulations from there. We also work with the board works with administration as well as legal counsel in order to develop those policies, and we also solicit feedback from our community as well when looking at which policies come up and some of the revisions that need to come to those in order to improve for our students. So we're always looking at these policies. We meet typically monthly as a committee. Policies will undergo 2 sets of reviews. It will undergo a first read followed by a second read, and then after the second read, after the full board approves it, they are adopted into our policy manual. Some of the things that we talk about, some of the definitions that come up when looking at policies. So policies are those regulations, those guidelines that are developed by the Board of School Directors. So they're developed specifically by the board, so they're typically called board policies. They're not administrative policies, but they're board policies, and they are typically following what is delegated by the law, what's codified into school code, and they're typically broad authorizations in there to authorize programs on how the district and how the school is run, and then they will typically outline and give delegation to the administration to develop how those are carried out. And typically what we see are those regulations. And sometimes in board policies, you'll see something called an administrative regulation. Those are the regulations that carry out the functions of the policies set by the board. And you might see those inside of our website on board docs, sometimes labeled AR. And there's a difference between those. Those administrative regulations are what is the board has directed the administration to develop, and we've developed those in order to carry out the policy. Those are not necessarily board approved. They're shared at all of the curriculum committee or the board policy meetings when we update those, but it allows more flexibility for the administration to develop those and some latitude to be able to change those, whereas the board policies undergo 2 sets of reviews and approval by the full board. Similarly, in the administrative regulations, sometimes talk about the practices that we do. And practices are basically just that established way of doing something. They are things that we have done in the past, or sometimes we say that's the way we've always done something. We hear that phrase a lot. That's the way we've always done it. Procedures are those very specific sets of steps that outline exactly what we do. We find procedures typically in our student handbooks. We might see procedures in things like flip charts. Those are the very defined ways that we carry out something. So not everything is necessarily a policy, not everything is necessarily a practice or a procedure, but we just wanted to share those definitions on what actually falls under board policy, and then from there an administrative regulation, and then what sometimes is just a practice and a procedure. You can find all of our policies on our district website on rtsd.org. If you navigate through the main navigation under the school board section, there's a section for board docs, and they're actually ordered by series. Some series deal with pupils, some series deal with personnel, some are with budget, and you can navigate through those, and you can also search through those as well. Question always comes up is what brings a policy before a committee? Like when you're developing the agenda, how do policies actually come up? One of the things is legal. If there are changes to school code, that is typically what brings a policy before this committee. We need to make sure that all of our policies are in line with any changes that happen in the law. Also, we are a member of the Pennsylvania School Board Association. Pennsylvania School Board Association frequently reviews policies, and they make policy recommendations to us for changes. They're also following any legal guidance that comes out. So as a member district, they will make recommendations, and at times we will bring those to the committee as well. As well, this committee has a regular review cycle where we look at policies that are more dated, usually over 10 years old, and we try to go through those. And we try to bring those together in a series where we will review those and make sure that they are timely and if there are any changes that need to be made, as well as, again, the timing or the age. When we're dealing with finances, now we might look at our finance as we're building our budget for the next school year. We might begin to look at our finance policies. When we are at the end of the school year or the beginning of the school year, we might begin to look at our pupil policies because that's what we're developing inside of areas of our codes of conduct. But also district priorities. As district priorities change, we will then bring some of those and make some shifts, some of those as we're doing tonight, to make some shifts of priorities and things that come up. We will make sure that they come to this committee as well. And just generally when we're structuring our policy, you'll notice if you're really browsing all of our policies, there's a lot of them, they tend to follow a very similar format. We'll start with the purpose of the policy and the authority by which the board is given to delegate those duties in there. We'll put any definitions in there that might need clarification, but also the delegation of responsibility if that's given to the superintendent, if that's given to principals, and then the specific guidelines that might come with that policy. So that's something that we share at the beginning of every year, so hopefully that's helpful as we get started with the 2026 policy year.
Thank you, Dr. Hand, for that helpful reminder. Next, we're going to move to the public comment section of the meeting, and I'd like to thank everyone for coming out tonight. It's just always great to see such an engaged citizenry. So we do want to make sure everyone who came out to speak gets a chance to speak. So if you could make sure, if you intend to make a public comment tonight, please sign in at the door. There should be a sign-in sheet just with your name and the town in which you live. Just so we get the spelling of your name correct and where you reside for the minutes and for the official record. Per Board Policy 006, any resident or taxpayer of Radnor Township is welcome to make public comment. To make sure everyone gets a chance to speak and we're not here all night. We do limit, per our policy, comments to 4 minutes each, and I'm going to ask Mr. Christofko to be our timekeeper tonight. He's also going to hopefully give you a heads up when you have about a minute left so that you know you can start to wrap up eloquently if you so choose. And then I do want to let you know there is also a comments period at the end of our meeting. So, you know, you're welcome to make a comment now and also at the end of our meeting if you decide to stay for our meeting and you want to comment on anything else that transpired during the meeting or anything else at all. And I do just want to let you know that as a board and our committees, we typically don't gauge in like a immediate back and forth with any of the comments that are delivered. We just don't have the time for that and to be able to get to the official business of the meeting. But I do want to assure everyone that all of your comments are being heard, not just by everyone who is in attendance tonight or joining us remotely, but anyone else who is not here has the benefit of the recording. And I do encourage, especially if they're a member of this committee or a member of our administration, for them to go back, if they're not able to join us live, to go back and review the recording and listen to and hear all of the comments. So with that being said, I would like to invite anyone who has already signed in to come up and start off the comment period. And when you introduce yourself, just state your name and the town in which you live. That's all you need to do. Thank you.
Luciana Librandi from Radnor, Pennsylvania. Again, my name is Luciana Librandi, and I'm the parent of a freshman at Radnor High School. I'm here tonight as a parent whose family has been directly impacted by the misuse of generative AI. I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I ask that my comments be received in the spirit in which they're offered: concern for student safety and desire to strengthen our district's policies in a rapidly changing world. Generative AI is no longer theoretical. It is accessible, powerful, and increasingly used in ways that can cause real harm, especially to minors. When AI-generated or manipulated images and videos are used to sexualize, demean, or humiliate a student, the impact is immediate and lasting. These incidents do not end when a file is deleted or a message disappears. For a teenager, the emotional and psychological effects can be profound. We ask that the board consider updating the Radnor School Policy and Student Handbook to include specific, clearly defined protocols for responding to incidents involved in AI-generated content. First, we believe the policy should require immediate action. Once a principal or staff member is alerted to an incident involving manipulated or AI-generated content that targets a student. This should apply regardless of whether the content originated on or off school grounds, if it is shared, shown, or discussed within the Radnor school community. Second, the policy should establish firm timelines for contacting the Radnor Police Department and pursuing search warrants when appropriate. Digital evidence can be deleted quickly. Delays, however unintentional, can result in the loss of crucial information and limit the ability to fully investigate what occurred. Third, we ask that clear safeguards be put in place for students during questioning. Students should not be interviewed without parental permission. When a student is questioned, a trained staff member of the student's choosing should be present whenever possible. For example, a female student should have an option of a female staff member present, and the same consideration should be extended to male students. The policy should also allow for reasonable accommodations based on individual student needs. We strongly encourage the district to adopt a clear and consistent communication plan. Families involved in an investigation deserve timely updates on status and process. At the district level, communications to the broader school community should be factual, transparent, and carefully worded. Minimizing or downplaying an incident can unintentionally harm victims and can contribute to lasting trauma, particularly at an age when mental health vulnerabilities are well documented. Finally, we ask that the district commit to annual education for students and parents on generative AI.
1 minute remaining.
Thanks. This education should be age appropriate, ongoing, and developed in consultation with professionals and law enforcement. Students and families should understand not only the technology, but also the legal and personal consequences associated with misuse, including those outlined under Pennsylvania law, such as Act 125. We recognize this is new and complex territory, but doing nothing or relying on public policies written before this technology existed leave students unprotected. Our goal is prevention, accountability, and the well-being of our daughters. Thank you for your time and your attention and your willingness to consider these necessary updates to protect the students of Radnor School District.
Did you ask me to do something before I read my comment?
State your name.
Oh, okay.
State your name and your town.
My name's Morgan Dorfman, and I live in Wayne. Thank you for the chance to speak. I'm here tonight because the district's handling of its sexual harassment policy raises serious concerns about transparency, investigative integrity, and compliance with Title IX. Before any district-wide emails were sent to address concerns regarding AI-generated videos, the school had an admission from a student that AI-generated sexualized images of minors had been created and the evidence was destroyed. Yet those facts were not disclosed in any of the district's emails regarding this incident. Instead, they minimized the conduct and framed the situation in a way that obscured the seriousness of what the school already knew. Those communications also raise an important question. Why were district emails signed by law enforcement in this case when serious safety communications in the past were not? That decision conveyed an appearance of law enforcement endorsement, even though the investigation was incomplete, and it blurred the line between the district's obligations and law enforcement's role. The criminal investigation itself was deeply limited, with no search warrants issued prior to charges being filed. Victims were not interviewed or communicated with before charging decisions were made. No meaningful effort was made to preserve or examine digital footprints, known apps, or broader online activity that could have established scope, pattern, or further harm. An admission to the conduct and destruction of evidence narrowed the investigation when it should have expanded it. Rather than triggering a prompt and independent Title IX response, the district characterized this as an out-of-school matter before conducting a Title IX investigation. That characterization delayed action, it shifted the burden onto families, and left students without protections while serious safety concerns remained unresolved. Title IX does not require families to initiate enforcement in order for schools to act. The obligation rests with the institution. Here, the school failed to act in any meaningful Title IX capacity, forcing families to file formal complaints simply to trigger a process that should have begun once the school had notice. Even now, the structure of the Title IX response raises concerns. The same law firm that represents the school's interests is conducting the Title IX investigation. An investigating firm who represents the institution under review cannot be considered independent. Title IX requires impartiality, not internal damage control. Taken together, these failures reflect a pattern: premature conclusions, deferral to incomplete processes, and a reluctance to act independently when student safety demands it. This board has an obligation to ask hard questions, not just about outcomes, but about policy and procedure. Why an admission did not prompt broader investigation? Why emails omitted criminal charges and minimized known facts? Why families had to force action, and whether the current investigative structure can fairly assess the district's conduct. I urge the board to take an independent look at how this was handled, ensure Title IX obligations are met, and restore trust through transparency and accountability. Schools are supposed to protect our children, not themselves. Thank you.
Adam Dorfman, Wayne. Good evening. I'm speaking tonight as a father of 4 children, and I'm a very confused parent. What good are laws if they are not enforced? What good are policies if they are not followed? And most importantly, what message are we sending to our children? Students reported something so disturbing that they felt compelled to tell the adults in the room. That matters. When children come forward they're doing exactly what we teach them to do: speak up, trust adults, ask for help. What they learn next is troubling. Instead of protection, they experience delay. Instead of accountability, minimization. Instead of safety, silence. The school labeled this an out-of-school issue, even though the harm followed these children into their school day, their classrooms, and their lives. Families were left to push for action rather than seeing the school step in to protect students as required. So I ask, why is the school refusing to protect and defend children who reported sexual, criminal activity that directly affects their safety at school? If students speak up and nothing happens, what lessons have we taught them? Laws and policies mean nothing if they are not enforced, and schools cannot ask children to trust adults if adults fail to act when it matters most. Thank you.
Do we have any other live public comment at this time? I know we also have some recorded public comments, right? Do you want to play those now? Two? We have two.
Audrey Greenberg, a resident of Radnor Township. I am the parent of 3 children in the Radnor Public Schools. I am requesting that the school district share with the school community accurate official information from law enforcement about last December's AI-generated non-consensual explicit imagery involving students. We have a superintendent-led communication from January 16th that minimizes and reframes what occurred in a misleading way, stating, "The police and county forensic teams investigated, and no evidence shared with law enforcement depicted anything inappropriate or any other related crime." This is directly contradicted by the official January 23rd statement from the Delaware County District Attorney, issued through Radnor Township Police, which I will read in its entirety. Quote, "After being alerted in December of 2025 of the possible use of AI to generate non-consensual sexualized imagery of multiple juveniles that occurred within Radnor Township, the Radnor Police Department conducted an investigation in collaboration with the Delaware County District Attorney's Office, and specifically the Delaware County Internet Crimes Against Children Detective Division. As a result of the investigation, a juvenile offender was charged with the crime of harassment for their conduct. Please be alerted to the dangers of AI and that criminal use of it will be investigated and charged appropriately." End quote. The DA's statement and the January 16th district communication cannot simultaneously be true. The official statement provides facts as determined by law enforcement and prosecutors. There is no ambiguity in that language. It identifies the nature of the conduct, confirms a joint investigation with the district attorney and ICAC task force, and states plainly that criminal charges were filed. After reading the January 16th communication, many parents have come to incorrect conclusions. Some believe no charges were brought. Others believe the conduct was benign. That level of confusion in a matter involving ongoing student safety and criminal conduct is unacceptable, especially since it was entirely avoidable and is easily remedied. We are asking this board to direct the administration to send a district-wide update that provides the community with the official law enforcement statement. This should be shared without spin, reinterpretation, or minimization of the criminal activity. Doing so would immediately give much-needed clarity to communities, stop continuing harm to students who have had the crimes against them ignored, demonstrate respect for families and students, reinforce the seriousness of criminality using AI to create inappropriate content, and show that this district values transparency over discomfort. It would also begin to rebuild trust, which can only exist by telling the truth, even when it's hard. I urge the board to take this straightforward yet critical corrective step immediately. Thank you for your time. My name is Jody Warren, and I live in Wayne, PA, and I'm a current Radnor parent. All three of my children have been educated in Radnor schools, which is why I care deeply about the policies that help keep students safe. I want to express my strong support for the committee's review of policies 249, 248, and 815 as they relate to the non-consensual use of a person's image or likeness in AI-generated or manipulated content. This is an important and necessary conversation. The rapid evolution of AI has fundamentally changed how harm can occur, often instantly, digitally, and without physical contact. And our policies must be prepared to address that reality. Clear, well-defined policies and procedures are essential so that students, parents, administrators, mandated reporters, and anyone else who may need to elevate a concern know exactly what to do, when to do it, and who's responsible for taking action. In moments involving potential harm to students, hesitation and uncertainty can compound the damage. Clarity creates confidence, consistency, and safer outcomes for everyone involved. Equally important is a shared understanding of what constitutes a school matter versus a law enforcement matter, and how those entities coordinate in real time. When roles, responsibilities, and communication protocols are clearly established, everyone can be reassured that situations are being handled appropriately and with urgency. Recent communications surrounding this latest incident illustrated how quickly confusion can arise when messaging is not fully aligned. While I'm not here to revisit the details of that situation, it underscores just how critical transparent processes and coordinated communication are to maintain community trust. Radnor has long been a district known for thoughtful leadership and a proactive approach to student well-being. Reviewing these policies sends a strong message that the district's intent to stay ahead of emerging challenges rather than react to them. Thank you for your willingness to examine whether updates are advisable and for your commitment to ensuring that the district policies reflect both the realities of modern technology and the expectations of the communities we all share. Thank you.
Thank you for all of your comments. This concludes the first comment period of this meeting. Just a reminder, there is a second comment period at the end of the meeting. We're going to move on to the business portion of the meeting now. First up is the review of the minutes from the October 2025 meeting of the Policy Committee. Do any of the meeting committee members have any comments on the minutes?
No, they were fine.
Ms. Rosenblum?
Fine to me.
Okay, so we're going to forward these minutes on to the full board for its approval at its next meeting in a couple weeks. Now for the agenda items, Dr. Hand, do you want to remind us as to these policies that we first conducted first reads on way back in October that are now up for second reads?
Sure. We could take those. We can do 4.01, 02, and 03 singularly if you want. We can do 404, 5, and 6 together as a cluster, and then we'll do 4.07. So 4.01 is policy. These are all second reads, 4.01 through 4.07. 4.01 is policy 703, sanitary management, and this policy is under review based on its policy age, and updates in there include references to state departments, language clarification of responsibilities, and adjusting for RTSD policy formatting, as well as separating the delegation of responsibilities and adding the guidelines sections.
So as I recall, we went through pretty robust first reads of each of these policies back in October. Hopefully at this second read stage, we don't really have any substantive comments to make without having to send it back for first read. So I guess I'd open it up to Ms. Stern and Ms. Rosenblum as to whether you have any additional comments at this time.
No additional comments. I'm fine with the updates.
I have no comments for this policy, 703.
I guess, can we move on to 708?
Yep. Item 4.02 is policy 708, lending of equipment and books for second read. This policy as well is under review based on its policy age and the policy cycle. The updates in here include organization of the content and acknowledgments, the idea of putting in acknowledgments in writing, as well as cross-references added for policy 707.
Any additional comments on this policy?
Also okay with the updates on this policy.
I'm fine with the wording of it. There's a couple of minor edits. They're non-substantive. I'll just follow up with you after the meeting, but we'll see these on the agenda for adoption. Thanks.
Policy 709.
Item 4.03, Policy 709 is Building Security, also for second read. Policy as well, and part of the 700 series that we were doing together based on review for policy age and the policy cycle. The updates in here include sequences, ordered of guidelines, clarification of the delegation of responsibilities. We did add a definition in there, as well as additional guidelines referencing violation consequences.
Any comments on this policy?
I just have one comment on that, and I think it's not substantive also, but under the guidelines for number 2, would we consider adding where it says each authorized user who receives access to any of the buildings shall sign for appropriate access and any associated devices at the time that they sign for those? Or can we consider adding at the time of receipt, or is that assumed?
Ms. Rosenblum, is that a question for us? Because I want to tell you, I don't recall ever signing for my fob, but I'm happy to at this time.
There is a form for that, and it's actually an attachment as part of policy.
Well, I've had mine a very long time, long before you ever arrived here.
So that might have been added on
It may have been.
afterwards. But there is a form for that now, yes.
I do remember signing for it.
I will happily stop by and sign.
I signed for mine.
Then, this is official. I've been here a long time. Okay, I will come by and sign the form. Thank you.
Okay.
So
I think it's implied that you're signing at the time that you receive them.
right.
Then I'm fine with the updates.
Anything else?
On my end.
I think the next 3 policies we can address together. We only have them divided up because I guess we have the same procedures for each type of employee, right?
Correct. So we'll take those together. So policy 317, 417, and 517 are all the same. The difference is 300 section, 400, 500 address different types of staff groups, but the policies are all the same as far as the readings in there. It only references them differently in the descriptor at the front, but the policy language itself is all the same. So these were updated, and I'll save the long read in here, but basically 2 references for the Code of Professional Conduct and Practice for educators. There were updates in the law regarding those. We wanted to make sure that these adequately reflected those, and also some things specifically to certified staff members and how they update their records within the Teacher Information Management System, also known as TIMS.
Any additional comments on either any of these 3 policies?
Fine with the updates of these.
Yeah, I'm fine with these 3.
Great, so we'll move them along for second reads at the board level as well. And then the final policy for second read is 102 academic standards.
The very last one we have for second read tonight is 102 academic standards, and this policy was updated to reflect the changes to the state standards for the 25-26 school year, and the changes include new requirements for science, environment, and ecology, technology, and engineering standards, part of the broader STEELS standards, and we define those based on grade levels, how we divide those out, and we will see this policy again in the next school year when financial literacy is required, and we will add that into policy for next school year as well.
Great. Any additional comments?
Again, I just have a couple of very minor edits, so I'll take that offline with you.
Great. So I think we can move on to the discussion items. So just as a reminder, as Dr. Hand so helpfully summarized for us, Pennsylvania School Code requires that before any new policy or changes to existing policy takes effect, the law requires us to conduct 2 different reads or 2 different rounds of review, both at this policy committee level and at the full board level. So what you just saw us do with these policies is that we put them through a second read, meaning we already put them through kind of more substantial, substantive first reads back in October, and we had sent it to the full board I guess, at the November board meeting, and they had conducted their own first reads of those same proposed changes. So at this point, we've just done the second reads at this policy committee level, and we're going to forward each of these policies with the additional very minor changes to the full board for their second read review at their meeting at the end of this month. And if they approve each of those, then these policies will actually go into effect. And you might think, gosh, this process is so time consuming. It took us, several months usually to affect or change, policy. But the law requires this so that, policy review is supposed to be deliberate and thorough and thoughtful. And I guess it's to guard against kind of making changes in kind of the heat of emotion or guarding against policy whiplash where you can just, change policies, on the fly. So I just wanted to give you that kind of context and perspective because now these items that we're going to consider now, it's actually at the other end of the timeline where we're introducing them just for discussion. So you'll notice that we don't have red lines like we just did for each of the policies that we just discussed. Now we're here to consider proposed changes. So we don't have actual changes in mind. I think every one of us is kind of approaching this with an open mind. These are existing policies, so we're going to review them specifically with certain changes in mind that were articulated on the agenda. And then for 5.02, that is actually a brand new policy that we would put in place. And again, we don't have templates in mind just yet. We've already done a lot of research, or Dr. Hand has, at our direction, so that we're prepared. But there's kind of, other discussion to be had as to, what we think a policy for welcoming schools might look like. But for 5.01, generative artificial intelligence, this item, I think a lot of you referenced in your public comments, so we're going to start with our discussions there. But, what kind of future action might look like is that tonight, if we feel that there are changes that would be necessary or advisable, at our next meeting, we would, generate red lines just like we had for the previous policies for those to be reviewed at our next policy committee meeting. And those would be first reads, which would be, more substantial reviews where we would actually look at text and consider it. But right now, we're just kind of considering those.
Pardon me, I think Ms. Rosenblum was kicked out. She needs to be admitted back in. I just didn't want her to miss too much.
Lon, are you back with us?
Back. Thank you.
Sorry about that. We're just getting started on 5.01. So we're going to look at 3 different policies through this lens. The first one that I have teed up is policy 249, bullying. So, Ms. Stern, do you want me to start with you, or would you prefer that I start?
No, I'm happy to have you start and to kind of weigh in with the caveat of I appreciated the public comment about the nexus, and so I want people to notice that, for instance, our bullying policy does talk about situations that happen on school property, and it's a challenge for us that we, like all of you, are learning that nexus between what happens out away from school and how it can come into school and impact our students is one that is becoming more present, more pertinent, more frequent, potentially, as technology grows. And so, I can only just say apologies in advance that, we didn't already know that, and as we look to make changes, or that I didn't know it would happen this quickly. But I think all of us, maybe I won't speak for you, the nexus between what can happen outside of school and how it can impact at school, we do understand that, and it's looking at the policy now, it says school grounds, and yet clearly there can be situations that happen not on school grounds. And I'm going to need, at times we need our solicitor to help us navigate where's that appropriate line.
So I think what you're talking about is actually in the AR for this policy. So
I'm reading the policy that the definition is of bullying is something that occurs in a school setting. So that's what our current policy says.
right, but the final sentence refers to the AR, the specific circumstances in which the district has jurisdiction over a student's conduct that takes place off campus will be outlined in the AR. And so there is the provision providing the necessary nexus in the AR.
No, I absolutely
Yeah.
agree. What I'm saying to you is we may even need to consider changing the beginning of it because that's so true. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay, so
Apologize.
maybe making that even more
Yeah, that may
apparent.
be something we need to say.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, because we do rely on that nexus provision, those actually, 5 different nexus provisions, quite a lot, because I think we do all recognize in this age of advanced technology, the vast majority of conduct might actually take place off campus, but it so often triggers one of these provisions, right, where student expression or conduct materially and substantially disrupts the operations of the school, or the administration reasonably anticipates that the expression or conduct is likely to materially and substantially disrupt the operations of the school. I think that gets triggered all the time. So I think definitely we need to keep this in there to allow us to be able to reach and have jurisdiction over off-campus conduct, and maybe make it even more prominent, and maybe elevate it to the policy itself rather than just keeping it at the administrative regulation level.
You're reading the administrative regulation right now.
Right,
Okay,
yes.
Got it.
Yes.
So one of the things that we don't typically write ARs in a policy meeting, that's why I was looking at the actual policy, recognizing that there's administrative regulations. And so when you just said that, I was like, wait, I don't see that in the policy. You're reading the AR.
Right.
Got it. Thank you.
But I do think that nexus, because we do rely on it so often and it's so important, maybe we consider moving it into the policy itself or having it in both places. I don't see the harm in kind of reiterating it and making it more prominent. And just as a reminder, as Dr. Han, mentioned in his administrative remarks, typically the policy is the purview of the school board, right? And the administrative regulations are kind of more detailed practices and procedures that are articulated for the benefit of the administration, so that the staff have kind of more guidance and instruction as to how to effectuate the policy in kind of their day-to-day operations. And that reflects the division of responsibility, right? Like, as a board, our responsibility primarily is one of oversight. We set the strategic direction for the school district, but then we hire the administration. The superintendent is in effect our CEO, and he or she hires the staff to conduct the day-to-day operations. So the reason we put kind of the more detailed procedures in the ARs is that they have the flexibility to be able to adjust them on the fly to deal with day-to-day circumstances that might move too quickly for, a board or a committee to be able to effectuate at the policy level, which you just saw could take months. So, it's more of an art than a science. It's kind of deciding like where to put something. And certainly as a board, I think we view, even though, we only, formally, technically have purview over the policy language, we certainly give feedback and give a lot of guidance to the administration as to what we think the AR should look like, the level of detail we're expecting, and certainly we expect it to be faithful to the spirit of the policy. And we welcome comments from the public when they feel that the AR is perhaps not detailed enough, if it's not being followed to the letter, if it's lacking in guidance for administration. So that's precisely kind of the discussion and considerations that we're going through here. So I definitely think the nexus language, if we, I don't want to say we bury it, but, a lot of times people only read the policies. They don't realize there's an entire administrative regulation behind it. I do think we should strongly consider moving it into the policy, repeating it there, or just moving it and taking it out of the AR. Having it in both places, I don't see the harm in that. But because it's such a critical way for us to just have jurisdiction and purview over this conduct that, quite frankly, I think probably happens more often than not, than taking place on campus now that, students aren't even supposed to be on their phones during the school day.
The only thing I would say about that, Ms. Lau, is one piece of information that would be helpful for me to have as we look at these policies is how are other school districts handling this piece of it? Because it is a bit of a challenge. I mean, if we were to pull into the policy, we are now going to be responsible for bullying that occurs off campus, that could become very burdensome and problematic. And so I think the way that might be worded in the policy, I think we would have to be really careful about that we don't then create a situation where the district is now responsible for any number of incidences that could occur outside of school that are outside school, and be mindful that it's the nexus that we're talking about and not the incident. I guess the nexus, not the incident itself that occurs off campus. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so are you comfortable with the language as it's currently formulated in the AR?
To say I'm less concerned with the AR is more to say I stay more focused on the policies themselves. And tonight I wasn't necessarily prepared to say how I think the wording of it should be. I wanted to hear the public comment, hear the concerns, hear, fellow board members, and then ask some questions and kind of task our administration with gathering some information, because I do think that we have to be careful to not overextend our authority beyond school property. Nexus being one that I do think is our responsibility. So that's what I would want to say about that.
I guess my view is we wouldn't be extending anything if we're just using the language that's already in the AR and just moving it into the policy itself to give it more prominence.
Oh, to give the language. I'd have to read it. I mean, that's why we'll end up with a draft. That is why we'll end up with a draft.
That's fair. Ms. Rosenblum, do you have any comments on this particular point, the nexus language?
Yes, I would agree with you, Ms. Lau, that, the information that's in the administrative regulation is really kind of what is at the meat of all of this. The question that I have there is that if we move it to a policy, does it have to be guided by law, by PA law?
I would think even if it appears just in the AR, it has to be compliant with the law.
Yeah, regardless of whether the language is in the policy or the AR, it needs to follow and track the legal standards that exist for when the school district can exercise jurisdiction to discipline or control conduct of students.
Okay. And then to Ms. Stern's comment, I do think that we need to be careful about that. Although, oftentimes things that do happen with students off campus do affect their school day, because they're there for the majority of their time, their waking hours. But I guess we have to be careful in the language, because there is a point where we do have to turn it over to law enforcement, where the repercussions are past our jurisdiction.
Honestly, I'm less concerned about the law enforcement situations. And I guess what I would say is it would be unusual to have this level of detail of the regulations that are in the AR. This level of detail that's in our AR is the kind of thing that we don't typically put into our policies. It's been a long-standing, practice, to speak about the things that we, defining all those words, Dr. Hand, to give a level of detail in the ARs. And so it wouldn't necessarily be this level of detail. And I'm more concerned about not over-regulating in situations, at least as it relates to the bullying policy. Now, I may feel differently on the other policies, but, there can be a lot of circumstances of bullying that are not digital and occur outside. And it's those instances that, occur on a playground at the park or in a neighborhood between two kids, to over oblige the district to be involved in every instance that might come into that might occur off campus. So I that's why I want to see what the language would be about the nexus. And if anything, what's missing from the policy is the provision that here's what I think is missing. If there is a nexus between something that occurs off campus and the school, what's missing from the policy is kind of a clear, explicit statement that the student is possibly subject to discipline within the school for off-campus behavior. That's to me what's kind of maybe missing from the policy, and that's the kind of thing that is an authority regulation that would belong in the policy, and then the specifics of that would be called out in the administrative regulation. Does that make sense in terms of what I'm saying? That might be the level. And again, I want to see, I would ask Dr. Hand and Mr. Christofko to see how are other districts handling that, not because I want to defer the responsibility, but because I think let's see if some other districts have given some thought to this and give it food for thought for us and what are considered best practices about that. But I think to make it clear in our policy that nexus has consequences. That's the point.
I fully agree with that. To the extent we can make that point more clear as well, I would be in support of. Ms. Rosenblum, do you have any thoughts on that?
I agree with that as well.
And then, when I read this policy, we go through lengths to define bullying, and then we have this almost throwaway sentence that says, and by the way, bullying includes cyberbullying, but that we don't actually define cyberbullying. I think this policy is begging for a definition of cyberbullying, especially since, and again, I'm not advocating for a definition that's limiting or exhaustive. Like a lot of times we use non-exhaustive lists, right, as examples to call out kind of the most frequent or salient, examples of the conduct that we're most concerned with. So, I would definitely, advocate for us to add a definition of cyberbullying. Again, I think it's, the right thing to do to make sure that our definition comports with state law. So I took a look at the PA code. I think the relevant act is actually Act 26 of 2015. So in Pennsylvania, bullying is actually considered a subset of harassment. So they define cyberbullying as cyber harassment generally. So Mr. Christofko, obviously I rely on your opinion as well, but I would look first to that act for sample language if we decide as a committee that we think it would be helpful to add a definition of cyberbullying and kind of pull it from the definition of cyber harassment under PA law. And then I would also look at Act 125, which I believe came up in some of our public comments as well, of 2024 for kind of helpful language. And I think that's where would be a ripe opportunity for us to call out the dangers of generative AI. I certainly think that's an example that merits, special emphasis. Again, I'm not saying that's the only kind of cyberbullying that takes place, but certainly given what's transpiring in our world and in our district, I certainly think that that would be an appropriate place. Because right now, I think when I read this policy, we're relying on the word electronic to do a whole lot of work here. And I know that, we've been told, oh, that covers us, it covers this kind of conduct, okay, but it does read a little bit to me as stale, just to rely on the word electronic. I mean, it doesn't even contemplate digital or social media, right? So I really think we should seriously consider an update that would include that kind of definition that references specific examples. And I know that probably a year or 2, 3 from now, we're probably going to have new examples of technology that we can't even contemplate today, but I certainly don't see that as a reason why we wouldn't go ahead now and try to try to flesh it out more and make this policy more current and more updated. So I welcome comments on that front from my fellow committee members.
The only thing that I would say about that is if we define cyberbullying, I think when we review the policies, we would have to do it more frequently, because I'm not in the position to say where technology is moving, but it's moving so fast that cyberbullying might be something else next year. Electronics, I would agree that doesn't, maybe the technology is either. So I kind of feel the same way about the word cyberbullying. I don't have a problem with inserting a definition for it now, but I would just ask that we review it more closely and not wait for 3. I think our normal time is 3 or 4 years.
Well, actually, this is the policy, Mr. Kristoff. Bullying is one we have to update every 3 years or review every 3 years. Is this one of those policies?
Yes.
So, yeah, it was last done in June of 2023. So, ironically, we would be dealing with this one in the next few months. We would have been dealing with this one in the next few months anyway, because the last review.
But I'm saying if we insert the definition of cyberbullying now, can we try to review it before the 3 years comes?
I mean, we maybe could, but the reality is that it's potentially, I won't say obsolete, but it's one of those policies. It would be very difficult to keep it constantly current. Mr. Christofko, do you know of districts that do it more often than every 3 years?
I don't know of districts that review it like on a yearly basis to update the language. I do know that when there are changes in the law, we often bring those to the board's attention so that changes to policy can be made, even if it's outside of the normal cycle of review for the policy. So if there is something significant that would change in the law, that would trigger an automatic alert that we would need to possibly take a look at the policy to see if changes need to be made.
And I think that's why we are going to be careful when we're drafting the language, right, so that we're using non-exhaustive, non-limiting terms, and try to make it as flexible as possible and anticipate kind of changes in technology that we know are coming. So, all valid concerns and points that we hopefully will try to address.
Well, and to that end, Ms. Rosenblum, to that end, that's one of the reasons that our policies are sometimes written the way they're written, is so that, and Mr. Bechtold is nodding his head, agreeing he knows what I'm about to say, is that is the reason we put the devil in the details in the administrative regulations, because they lend themselves to be updated more frequently. And our district, and I just want to acknowledge Dr. Hand and Mr. Bechtold, Dr. Batchelor, our district is really good. This team is really good about letting this board know when they make changes to administrative regulations. That's not really a requirement of the administration, but they know, this team knows that we care about it and we want to be updated. And so it's been the practice of this committee to let us know when changes happen to an AR. But the structure of them lends itself to put tweaks and best practices and to update it in a way that would become, I mean, you saw it's been since October that we worked on the first reads of those last round of policies, just because we didn't meet. And so the nature of policy approvals and policy change sometimes it makes more sense to have those details in the AR. And I knew that's why you were nodding your head. You knew where I was going on that one, right, Mr. Bechtold?
That is correct. It allows the administration to be a little more nimble to make changes as opposed to going through the entire process for a policy revision.
Can I open up comments by our student rep or our faculty rep?
Yes. I really like how you brought up the part about electronics, and I think especially in this day and age with so much advanced technology, electronics can serve as more as an umbrella term, but like because this is a policy in this changing environment, it's really important to include those specifics because it's not just like cell phone, TV, smartwatch, like it's like what is it on that cell phone, what is it that you're watching on that TV, and what people are being exposed to. So I think it'd be really good to kind of just widen that scope to accommodate to how things are changing today.
Thank you. All right. Unless there are any other comments, I just wanted to caveat, I know I kind of directed Mr. Christofko to reference PA law. I would also like us to consider that perhaps we shouldn't even set the bar quite so low. I mean, so we as a district have the authority to kind of expect more out of our students and our staff than just, avoiding criminal behavior, right? So, like, I do think there are, there's a lot of room for us to contemplate setting, kind of what we expect from our students and our staff and employees that, might not rise to the level of a crime in Pennsylvania, right? But certainly not something that we would tolerate in our school district. So even though I just want to make sure that we're complying with PA law, I'm not suggesting that we set the bar there. I certainly think, we can set the bar, kind of where we feel appropriate. And then we do have procedures where it's necessary for us to refer cases to law enforcement. But I do think we can hold ourselves to a better standard than that even. Any other comments on this policy before we move on?
On my end.
Great, thank you. Moving on to policy 248, which is harassment. And Mr. Christofko, feel free to correct me, but it seems like the reason we have a separate harassment policy from our bullying policy is that a lot of this seems like it's dealing with Title IX?
That's correct, yeah. Now, not exclusively, but a lot of it does.
So I guess I would open it up to Ms. Stern or Ms. Rosenblum as to your thoughts as to any updates that you might want to see to this policy.
So the one thing that I think is I see kind of missing from harassment, ironically, is, and I don't know what I think the exact wording should be, but again, there's no reference in the policy to the nexus between off-school and on-school behavior. It talks about they've just been subjected to harassment, and maybe Mr. Christofko, you can clarify in law as it relates to harassment versus our bullying policy. Is harassment something that is understood to be able to occur anywhere? So that is that the reason we've never kind of referenced the nexus of harassment can occur off campus and still have an impact on campus? I mean, walk me through that, because I'm noticing it's not here.
Yeah, the district's ability to regulate student conduct is not determined by whether that conduct is harassment or bullying. It's determined by the parameters that the Supreme Court has decided exist over the school's ability to regulate the conduct of students that happens outside of the actual school premises. And there was a recent case in the past 5 years. It actually originated in Pennsylvania, involved the cheerleader making social media posts. It went all the way to the Pennsylvania or to the U.S. Supreme Court. They established a very fuzzy line as to when schools can discipline for out-of-school conduct, and that's the standard now that the lower courts are trying to work their way through and to clean up and to provide more concrete examples. Now, Title IX, which is a whole separate thing, has different regulations which say that Title IX complaints cannot involve conduct that occurs outside of the program. Because if you remember, Title IX is a statute that deals with regulating entities which receive federal funds. And so the federal funding relates to the program that is being run by the entity. So the whole ability to enforce Title IX rests with the idea that if you're receiving federal funds for a program, with that program, you must do X, Y, and Z. So your ability to enforce Title IX is limited to that program for which you're receiving federal funds, and here in the school district, that would be the educational program. So there's special regulations there that deal with that, and there's cases that deal with that. That's a little bit more complicated. And perhaps the reason why it wasn't originally included in here is because it does get a little bit, this is primarily dealing with Title IX, this policy, and it does get a little bit complicated when you get into those details. But if for example, two students were at the King of Prussia Mall on a Saturday, and one was harassing the other at the King of Prussia Mall, could the district discipline for that conduct? Well, if that's all that happened, the answer would be clearly no, because we don't, just because somebody attends school here doesn't give the school district the right to police every aspect of their lives. And so that's sort of, the issue with the harassment is when the issue comes up and is brought to us, we look, is this something that we can address as a district? Is this something that falls within the jurisdiction of the district to adjudicate? And then it moves forward from there, if there's any question as to that. Usually most of these incidents do happen in connection with the school program or on school premises, because harassment's usually a little bit more of a person-to-person kind of thing versus bullying.
So, Ms. Stern, if I may, I think the way that Title IX language tries to establish a nexus is a different way than we did it in our bullying policies. So if you look at the definitions of harassment and sexual harassment, item number 2 in each of those definitions, that's how they try to establish the nexus, where they say, has the purpose or effect of unreasonably interfering with a student's educational performance, or if it has this effect of interfering with your right to get an education, then that's enough. Like, that's how we have jurisdiction and purview, right? That's how I read this language.
That is a requirement, that it has to be something that would be determined by a reasonable person to be so severe, pervasive, objectively offensive that it effectively denies them the right to the access to the program. That's a requirement. That's correct.
Are these the legal statute definitions? Because sometimes we take legal statute for our definitions, and sometimes we craft them ourselves.
Yeah. These are out of the law.
Okay, got it. So the nexus that I was talking about is, I guess the short answer was, it's just implied. It doesn't, if it's impacting school, the person's access to the district program, that's the nexus. Thank you.
Yeah, it's just different language to get at the same result. When we crafted our own policy, we came up with our own language, but this is set out in federal law, and this is how they established the nexus. Okay. Ms. Rosenblum, did you have any comments on that point?
The only question that I have is it appropriate in anywhere under this policy to add something of substance as it relates to Act 125? Since sexual harassment, the definition under sexual harassment lists that, but it doesn't say anything about consensual, forged digital likeness.
And I have a question.
Or is that something that we put in another policy?
So I think, again, just as I suggested adding it to the bullying policy, I also think it would be helpful to add a definition to include cyberbullying or cyber harassment and to give specific examples such as generative AI. But I don't want to upset kind of, where we're trying to parrot the language of Title IX exactly. I don't want to, insert it in there and mess with that, because I do want to make sure we're completely aligned with federal law. But I don't see the harm of adding it separate, into the policy, but separately, standing alone. I do think it would add additional clarity, just as it would for policy 248.
Well, and to follow that up, Mr. Kristoff, if you could look into, so I think it's kind of following that same train of thought, is that, what guidelines can we have? So much of this policy follows Title IX. and play that all out. If for whatever reason a situation goes through the entire Title IX process and is found to be, an invalid Title IX claim, but still having a measure of, or maybe answer it this way: if there's found to be a measure of harassment, is automatically going to be found under Title IX? I guess what I'm trying to say is there a situation that there could be an incidence of harassment that would not rise to the level of Title IX, but we're still trying to say that as a district, you don't get to behave that way. You don't get to treat someone that way in this district, and there will be consequences. What are the guardrails for what we as a district, what authority we might have to put that into our policies? I'm not asking for that answer right now. That's the question. That's the information gathering that I would ask. Do you hear what I'm saying? Just like you're kind of talking about an expanded, taking a piece of this and expanding it into cyber harassment, but let's not mess with Title IX. Is there that circumstance? I would like to understand that.
Is that a question you had for Mr. Krasovka, or?
Yeah, he's writing it down.
No.
I can see him jotting it down.
Again, I think as a school district, we should, set the standard where we feel, that's the right standard to have for our school district. Obviously, we're going to comply with federal law. That's kind of the bare minimum. But I certainly think it's well within our purview to say we actually expect more than just, non-criminal behavior. So I would feel comfortable adding specific language that makes that clear. But I certainly, don't want to mess with our ability to comply with Title IX either. So whether it's in this policy or if we feel like we need to separate it so much that we have a separate policy, I don't really care much about that. But I certainly think our policies could benefit from that additional clarity. Ms. Rosenblum, did you have any other comments on this policy?
I would agree with that.
So really, the same comments that I had where I felt like the word electronic was doing way too much work. I just think we could use, or should consider additional language to address kind of cyber harassment. Any other comments? And I did want to just point out, there is an entire page on our district website that deals with Title IX, and there are a lot of different documents that are referenced and cross-referenced, but the comments about being on notice of a potential Title IX claim when the district has actual knowledge. So that is, straight from Title IX language. It is embedded in our, I guess it's an attachment to our policies. It's called Title IX grievance process, and that's where we have that standard. So I was happy to see that we do have that standard, but I appreciate the point about adequate training, especially if it's, it took me a few minutes to find it buried in our policies, so certainly it's something that, we shouldn't expect all of our employees and staff and teachers to know, and it's certainly, the onus is on us, the administration, to provide adequate training and awareness on behalf of our teachers, everyone who's on the front line, so that they're able, they're the ones who are able to identify this conduct and kind of know exactly, what obligations it triggers on behalf of our district. So I appreciate that point, that even though our policies might have that standard in there, we do periodic training, but this is a point that I think, we're going to take care to emphasize with our teachers. All right, any other comments? Or we can move to policy 815, which is acceptable use of technology. So I think I'll just preface this by saying, this policy, unlike the two policies that we just discussed, this governs just district-issued technology, devices, and district-run networks. So, I was actually, pleasantly surprised that I think this is the policy where we do the best job of calling out examples like generative AI. We actually have an entire attachment, dedicated to AI, and I think we do give really helpful and salient examples here. Unfortunately, as I said, it only covers what students and staff and employees do with district-issued devices, so we still have this gap, right, where I think, a lot of, and it also covers students who bring their own devices and, decide to not use the school issued device. But if you bring your personal laptop or iPad or phone to school and you're using that for your schoolwork, this policy does cover those devices. But if you're using your personal phone, I guess, at home, I just want to point out that this policy as currently written would not cover that. So I think that's why it's important that we, looked at the other two policies, which would govern conduct with your own personal devices at home. But this in particular, even though I think we do a good job dealing with AI in this policy, it does have limited effect when, trying to cover people's personal devices.
Right.
Ms. Rosenblum, did you have any comments on 815?
The only thing that I thought about when I was reading this was under delegation of responsibility in compliance with the Children's Internet Protection Act. And I don't know if this falls under there, but it says the district shall on an annual basis educate students about appropriate online behavior. Would it be appropriate if we also added in there and inappropriate behavior?
I think we could look at that. Those 3 bullet points, again, to speak to things being dated, talks about on social networking websites and chat rooms. I don't know when the last time we talked about a chat room, but those 3 bullet points are specific to the language in SIPA, in the Children Internet Protection Act.
That's
So
why I wasn't sure if we could add it there.
I'm sure
but
if we needed to, we could add it somewhere else, but that, again, to Ms. Lau's point about not interfering with the legal language that's there, we might want to look at another place rather than in those 3 bullet points.
In fact, I think you do have it there in another place. So you're covered in another area. Okay, other than that, I'm fine with this.
Yeah, and I appreciate you pointing out the distinction that of the limitations of this particular policy. That being said, I know that we are, as a district, getting ready to undertake, an age-appropriate, I won't call it a seminar, but presentation, assembly, thank you, Mr. Bechtold, about this, which I'm glad. I would not advocate for putting something like that in here. I mean, in compliance with SIPA, we are going to educate students. I wouldn't say that it makes sense to put it into a policy, but I think it's really important that we communicate through this committee, more importantly through the curriculum committee, how seriously we take the need to explain to students, to parents, to the to the kids, just how do you convey to children, to students, the really long-term, lasting impact of their actions? I've often said the stupid things that I did as a kid, and we all did. Just don't have the ability to have the far-reaching impact that technology allows to exist now. And how do you convey that to children in a way that, their brains are not more mature than our brains were when we were that age. They're not more mature. They are brighter. These kids are brighter in many, many ways. But they're not necessarily developmentally more mature. And how do you convey the real seriousness of this to them? But I don't think that belongs in a policy. But I know that we have the assembly planned, and I know there'll be a lot of thought given to that. And we need to be ongoingly doing that. And be really honest with parents. When you hand your kid a phone, you are handing them the world. and the good, the bad, the ugly. And I say that as the parent of, my 2 older children are in their mid-30s. I did not confront this with my 2 older children. I confronted it more with my youngest. But it's a heavy lift you have, and my heart aches. It's a heavy lift you have, trying to convey the seriousness of their actions at a time when their brains are not more mature. They really aren't. But I don't think it belongs in a policy. I think this policy is good as it is.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm done.
Are you finished? You're done. Okay. I would be fine with putting it in an administrative regulation or in another area as long as it's prominent, because it isn't just appropriate behavior that we need to teach them. We do need to teach them the inappropriate behavior, but I'm careful with those words too, because I also recognize that when we introduce inappropriate behavior to, with specific ages, sometimes that makes them more curious. So I'm crossing committees here, but this might be something that we need to work with student services with, so that we can strategize and make it the most, so that it can benefit the students more in a positive way, and not so curious that they're wanting to experiment.
I definitely hear the point about the age appropriateness of any training that we do, assemblies that we do. I do think for our older students, it's not enough to teach them about appropriate kind of aspirational behavior. I think we do need to drive home the potential consequences, including criminal prosecution, with respect to certain behaviors. I think our high schoolers certainly can handle that, and I think need to hear that along with the positive messaging, right? Certainly our younger students, we can leave it to our administrators to determine, where the line is. But, I do think, it's a lot of times when they hear just the aspirational, be perfect, be nice, all that, I don't know if that necessarily always gets through. And I think sometimes they do need to hear specific examples of this is what could happen if you do this. So I think, that's a point well taken. I do want to give our student and our faculty reps a chance to comment on this as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that everyone is making. Just to kind of bring in my personal experience, I'm currently taking the AP Psych course at Radnor, which is an amazing course, one of my favorite classes. And currently we're in our development unit, so we're going through how brains develop when you're an infant, or even prenatal and into adulthood. And like Ms. Stern was saying, there is a very stark difference between an adolescent's mind and an adult. And a lot of times, like you said, we are bright kids, but without that exposure to the possibilities of what could happen when we do run into those mistakes, we kind of just don't know what we don't know. So I think it is very important to have those assemblies where we get taught, not just like you were saying, be nice, be perfect, but also when you are mean to someone, when you bully someone, when you harass someone, these are the outcomes. And I think that's really what sets it in for us to those are the possibilities. And also just another psych term that we're talking about is schemas, and that's basically just how we understand things to go. So when we're introduced those possibilities, that affects our schemas, and we kind of assimilate that into our understanding of different consequences, especially in a social aspect, because since we are teens, all we're doing is really hang out with our friends and going out and doing all of that stuff. So I think it's really important to just expose us to that at the age that we are right now.
Thank you.
So this one's a tough one, because the acceptable use of technology, the fact that it only applies to district devices, we do have a decent population. I know without having students using cell phones, they have found workarounds. They've been bringing iPads in, and if you have an iPad and you have an iPhone, they sync. So they, as much as we try as teachers to monitor, if you have 25 students in a class, it is hard to make sure that they're all remaining on task at the same time. So I do wish there was something a little bit more that does allow us to have, or the students to have a little bit more consequence with their own device. If it is something, it does go back to harassment and bullying, but I don't know. I'm torn here because I do think we need something a little bit stricter, something that really does send a message, because I don't think that students are really thinking about, oh, well, I'm doing this at home, I'm doing this on my, other device, it's harmless. But there are such far-reaching consequences, not only maybe for them, but for whomever is involved. And so I'm struggling a little bit with this one, simply because we do have, we are a one-to-one device. We are. I mean, everyone gets a Surface Go. If they want to use a Surface Go, which we have a large, again, group that will bring their own computer in. Some of them don't register those devices. So I don't know, it becomes such a gray area. And I know that, I don't know how we could change the policy, or even if that is attainable, or if we do consider those activities under the harassment or bullying. I don't know. But I do think education is huge. I am looking forward to the AI presentation. I'm, as a teacher who's been in here for a long time, I remember when Snapchat came into existence. I remember all these iterations of social media, and these kids are so much faster than we ever will be at changing technology. And so, I don't know, it's really hard to make sure that they are making good choices. And that if they are making these mistakes, as Lucy said, there does need to be consequences. And I don't know where that falls in, if it is the AR, if it is more in I don't know, but I am struggling a little bit with this one. Because I see it more often. It's sometimes little things that fall under the radar that we might hear about, but nothing happened. I don't know. This is a tough one.
Any other comments on this policy? No. So I think we can move on to 5.02. Hopefully, Dr. Han and Mr. Kristofko, we've given you enough guidance to generate red lines of maybe not each of these policies, but at least some of these policies for first reads at our next meeting. And I'm available if you have any questions as to maybe what we're looking for. But we'll look forward to having those items for first reads at our next policy committee meeting. So moving to 5.02, which is the welcoming schools item. So this is something I brought up at our last board meeting during, I guess it was new business, or maybe it was my committee report. But I do think, given where we are as a country today, and ever since the Department of Homeland Security rescinded its own longstanding policy directing ICE to not conduct enforcement actions at any sensitive locations like schools, places of worship, I think it's long overdue that Radnor has a formal policy in order to reaffirm our commitment to the right of all of our students, regardless of their background, to the right to receive an education in a protected and safe space, and that we respect their privacy rights. And I know that, those rights that already exist. I mean, the Supreme Court has reiterated and confirmed that under our Constitution. I do think that these times call for us to reaffirm them in a policy. I welcome kind of debate as to whether a formal policy is necessary. I know a lot of school districts have gone the way of just passing a resolution. I personally don't think a resolution is quite as strong, because when it becomes policy, it becomes part of our policy manual, and it's there and people can find it easily. If you just do a resolution, you have to remember when we passed the resolution, and people might forget about it with the passage of time, and it might just not be as salient or at the forefront of everyone's thoughts. So for me, a policy would be the right way to go, and then we can put the details as to what I think we owe our administrators and our staff and our teachers, just adequate training as to what to do. If this does happen on school grounds, just adequate training, like the difference between an administrative warrant and a judicial warrant, when you're required to let ICE onto school property, which is, property, even though we're a public school district, we have the right to restrict access to our school grounds during school hours. So just, I think directing our administration to adequately train our staff, because it could be anyone who happens to be standing at the door at that time. It's not just our members of our security department, because the stakes are so high. Hopefully the risk of incidents is still low, but if it were to happen, the stakes are so high. I think every one of us want to feel like we're adequately prepared and that we would know what to do and what our rights are, what the rights of our students are if this were to happen. So that's why I'm proposing this policy. We don't have anything, tangible or red lines or anything yet to review. We certainly have a lot of templates from all around the country, but I just wanted to put it up for discussion, certainly with the rest of my committee members, and just, get your take on whether we want to move forward with this. Lon, do you want to go first?
I can go first. I would be in support of that because, I hope that our risk is still low, but it doesn't really matter how low it is, because it's not just, the person that is being targeted that is affected. It's everyone around them. So it doesn't affect just that one person or that one family. It affects the people that are there at that moment, their neighbors, their classmates. So I'm not sure where it belongs. I think it's worth investigating and researching whether it belongs in the policy or I'm not sure. But I would be in supportive of researching that.
Well, I'm 1,000% in support of the concept of it. I do want to say we are already living into this commitment. We have a non-discrimination policy. We have principals and administrators and teachers and staff members, and from the superintendent to the bus drivers who pick our kids up every day. We have a group of employees here who are already dedicated to and committed to that safe and welcoming environment. It's actually part of our belonging initiative that we've been working on for several years. So my only hesitation is I don't want it to ever be perceived that we weren't already this. We just are looking to formalize and codify and I can't emphasize enough, reaffirm an already existing commitment. I don't want anyone left with, that we would be now just starting this new policy, that anyone would be left with that we weren't already committed to this is my only hesitation. Whether it's a resolution or a policy. I don't feel as strongly about it being a policy versus a resolution. I hear your point about it can be hard to find a resolution once we do it. It's in the minutes of that particular meeting. So I fully respect that, Ms. Lau. I would want to read the policy. If I'm being honest, I want to make sure that we don't do something that I feel like our risk is low. I enjoy feeling that our risk is low. I don't want anything to change that, because at the end of the day, our children being safe is what matters to me. So that's all I'm going to say about that piece of that.
Sure. When you're finished, I'd like to
No,
respond to that.
That's so. I'm happy to read whatever we bring, and I support it in my heart. But I do want to read it. It's a little hard for me to comment further without seeing the actual proposed language. But we already do this. And I think what's really most important is to, and I think that this already exists, is to make sure that, to your point, you know, the people, the boots on the ground, the people who are at our doors understand the ways to, you know, how they would handle certain situations and in de-escalating ways, you know, because I think it's really important in these times to try to approach things in ways that de-escalate a situation, not something else. That was it.
Long.
I appreciate those remarks, but I think I was thinking more of the lines of the legality of the actions by the staff, administration, and even the parents, just to, because you know, I do think that we you know, we do the best we can to create a safe environment for all of the students, staff, and administration, but these times are different, and I think it's getting, you know, these incidences are getting closer and closer to us. So I think it might be worth researching.
And
for sure.
yeah, and I do appreciate your comments, Ms. Stern. And, you know, and I just want to make it clear, you know, whenever I propose new policy or suggest that we could do better, you know, we do subscribe here in Radnor to a model of continuous improvement. So I just don't think we should ever feel uncomfortable improving because it somehow might make, you know, what we've done up until this point somehow look worse because we found a way to be better. Like, I never worry about that. Like, I just want to always be better, you know, and I never intend for any of my efforts to make us better as somehow an indictment of how we've done things in the past. Like, I know,
I appreciate that.
you know, like,
Yeah.
I just want to make sure, like, I never come at it, you know, with that kind of intention. So, Ms. Peterson, or?
I'm definitely interested in what that policy would look like. I was just kind of looking over some of the pupil ones. You know, I'm just curious where it would fit, and I agree with it 1,000%. I definitely think that it's just nice to have something in writing that you can look back on and say, okay, yes, we thought enough of this to make it a policy. That then is part of the collection of policies that are there to, you know, help our district. I've been here for a long time, and you know, when I saw the welcoming schools, I was definitely curious as to what that will look like and what that could mean for the students and even for staff. So yeah, I'm very interested in seeing what it could be. I don't really know what you know, what the future holds or what that looks like. I would assume we'll probably look at other schools and see if there is something out there. Makes me want to go to my own home district and look at their policies because I like policies, just to see if, you know, it is something that is the norm. But I'm definitely interested, yes.
Lucy, anything? For those of you who are curious, I think the closest school district that I personally feel has done a really good job is Norristown Area School District. So if you want to go to their website, they have an entire page dedicated to this. And I know Dr. Han has been closely looking at them. But, you know, obviously a lot of the bigger school districts, Chicago, I know Ms. Rosenblum, you know, you have contacts with the school district of Chicago. Philadelphia, right? We have plenty of examples. Obviously, we want to have a policy that works for us, that makes sense for us, given where we are in our demographics. But yeah, we have no shortage of examples, and I, you know, look forward to bringing kind of specific details for consideration to the committee in future months to come.
Great.
All right. With that, do we have any new business for the committee to consider? And then we can open it up again for more live public comment, if there is anyone who would like to make another public comment.
Yes.
Yes, please.
Morgan Dorfman, I live in Wayne. I I just wanted to clarify because I appreciate everything that you explained about redlining and going through policy. And there is a policy of harassment. So in the student handbook on page 54, it clearly states that a level 4 violation, and it lists them, so I can read it: terroristic threats, possession of a weapon, arson, inciting a riot, violation of substance abuse, physical assault, causing a fire alarm, and then indecent exposure, sexual assault, and any other form of sexual abuse or harassment. And in the January 16th email, it said that this conduct may rise to the level of a crime, and it did. A crime occurred here. We have a policy. The policy is harassment. The response by the school for level 4 violations is clearly stated. You guys thought this all out. You've redlined it. You've done this. And so I just urge the board again to consider that there are policies in place, and if we're going to have all these policies and all these laws and we're not going to enforce them and there are going to be no consequences for these students, that's something I strongly urge the board to look at and to reconsider and to understand what that message is sending to all of our students. Thank you.
Hi, Stephanie Orvin, Bryn Mawr. I actually agree with the other parents. I think it's great to hear how we're talking about these policies, but I agree. We have to think about the consequences, how we communicate them, you know, what's being said. I mean, I acknowledge, so I did write a few things down. I acknowledge that the school's finding that it was not on devices, but we talk about technology, electronics. Technology is just a piece of a device. Where it lives is in a cloud. There's VPNs. There's lots of different places where technology exists and where kids interact with it. Those things have to be thought about, and we have to consider it, and we have to educate ourselves as well as teachers and the administrations. They're not physically tethered, and we could use IP addresses. Incidents often are cloud-native applications. Third-party actors are hired. In this situation, I believe another person was hired, and that was all obfuscated. The Radnor Police and the Radnor School District does not have the proper resources, technology, or anything to kind of find these hidden things in the dark web and when they're deleted. But there are things out there that could allow us to find traces of how this happens. We have to address the modern challenges that protect and support our students. In response to the AI-generated images and the harassment policy, we have to add language around where images are sourced. There was a statement by Mr. Batchelor that they were publicly available images. I don't think that's an excuse that they were publicly available. Any images that were used to hurt another is harassment. Let's see, also district technology, you know, how you're putting guardrails around cloud-based applications again. Even if a student brings in a device, they still have access to the outside world. Same thing with, you know, if we're naive to think that just because the school gave a device that it's protected fully. And, you know, I do want to say too about, you know, kindness and conduct. Like, we do blame technology, but technology is a tool. Technology is a tool that is used, and saying kids do not understand consequences, we have to really teach respect and decency. You know, creating sexualized images, harassing others, fellow students, you know, they have very little to do with tech, but the choices students make. And, you know, my children were not directly affected, but indirectly affected. So when something happens to students in our community, it does affect everyone, both students and parents. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Meg Staffelt from Radnor. Just real quick, and I don't know if it's appropriate that it would be in policy, but one thing I didn't hear mentioned yet is just how the school treats victims after, like, if harassment is found or bullying is found. I have been really a little bit disappointed with the support that is available to victims or girls or victims of bullying, just in general. I don't know what other schools are doing. I have no idea. I have nothing to offer. But I did want to say, like, that has been the one thing where I'm like, it'd be really nice if after going through something, there were more kind of guidelines for the administration to be able to help, but I guess either party actually, to stay away from each other or whatever they need to do to feel safe. So that's all I wanted to add. Thanks.
Do we have any other live public comment? All right, if there is none, oh. Yeah.
Hi, Shannon Chandy. A couple of years ago, Great Valley students used TikTok to falsify images of teachers, and when I was reading those articles, I was horrified by the lack of remorse of some of those students who indicated that they would be comfortable doing it again against their teachers. And I think in this situation, for me, I just want to understand what is the consequences for students who, and I understand that their brains are not fully formed and they could make mistakes, but for those kids who truly are not remorseful, what will be the consequences for them? I recognize in the handbook that there are things like suspension and, not participating in extracurricular activities, but have we considered things like where teachers will not give them recommendations for college or will not support them in, those endeavors if they truly are not remorseful or continue to repeat this behavior in the school or outside the school. So those are just my concerns as a parent of middle schoolers who are not yet in high school, but just hearing about this and extremely concerned and disturbed by all of this. Thank you.
Ms. Shandy, what was your town? Your town? I just didn't catch your town.
Villanova.
Thank you.
Any other public comment? I will remind everyone that the next meeting of the full school board is on Tuesday, February 24th. So if you didn't get a chance to make a comment or didn't feel comfortable, you're welcome to come to that board meeting, and there will be 2 comment periods the same way it was tonight. So, but thank you everyone for coming out tonight and bearing with us.
Thank you.
And can I get a motion to adjourn?
No, we're just adjourned.
Oh, we're good. All right.
Just adjourned.